Hello, this is Julian with Coffea Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Dilgo WX wash processed Panama from Coffea Circulor. There's the bag right there. And Coffea Circulor, based out of Arendal, Norway. And this coffee was featured in our most recent blind taste test rankings video, where it finished 6th place out of 7 high-end Panamanian and Ecuadorian coffees on that day. And the main reason we were able to pick this one out from that lineup was because it did offer a fair bit of those herbal spice-like bergamot components that are present in so many of Coffea Circulor's coffees. That being said, it did yield a positive enough first impression that I was very curious about the potential for this coffee. So it will be interesting to see how it turned out, as this right here is day 37. And recipe we went with for this coffee was Coffea Circulor's recipe, which is a 15:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 95 degrees Celsius, about 203 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, which indicates a more medium fine grind. Roast profile for this one, you can definitely tell that this is on the lighter side of the spectrum, as a lot of Coffea Circulor's coffees hold up to the term Nordic Light to say that they are very light coffees by most standards and metrics. This one is definitely in line with that. With all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 17, first impression, and it was that blind taste test day. And the coffee did offer, as mentioned, a fair bit of those herbal, citric, bergamot-like components to it. But isolated on its own, it did offer a fair bit of the listed mango, as well as I couldn't help but pull out a fair bit of a sugary stone fruit aspect to it. There is plenty of that sweetness, as the coffee was a little bit more delicate than, well, I don't want to say as I might have expected, because I definitely expected it to be maybe on the more tame side of things, maybe on the more delicate, subtle side of things. But given that first blast of that kind of strong herbal bergamot-like component to it, I said, okay, maybe it won't necessarily lend itself towards that direction. But there was a lot of beauty in terms of the stone fruit-like sense upon the cooldown of this one. Day 19 through the Chemex, and it was a better day, as I was offering a fair bit more of the classical Panamanian geisha-like clarity with an abundance of softer citrus as well as more floral qualities to it. So that first impression did yield a fair bit of the traditional expectations for some of Coffea Circulor's coffees, but this one right here offered a fair bit more of the Panamanian characteristics, with the listed jasmine being very well defined. And I do want to give them credit for that, because I think it's been a bit since I've had a coffee that's had that great of definition to the listed jasmine-like aspect, with some slight tea-like savoriness as well as plenty of that citric brightness as well. So a couple of positive things to take away from these first couple of tries. Day 25 through the April brewer, and it seems to have improved greatly in terms of the intensity, as this was a very vibrant day of this one, as initially there was a slight bergamot as well as slight soapy quality to the cup, but it did cool off exceptionally well into a sweeter and well-defined ripe orange component. The cup is extremely herbal, and the listed chamomile feels apt, as there's a strong florality and a strong fruit intensity. So this one just took a complete turn, as the intensity really seemed to ramp up a lot on this day. Day 28 through the V60 with Coffea Circulor's recipe. And the cup was much better right off of brew than before, as there was much more of an emphasis on the fruit aspects, with an abundance of the listed mango and citrus being present, offering a sugary, fresh fruit aspect with a lingering aspect that could feel even slightly soapy. So once again, I'm returning to that because there are quite a few of these notes where I list that as being slightly soapy. I think that's the citric quality that's present in it, as it seems to offer that, I don't know how else to describe it, it just tasted a little soapy. The more it does cool, the florals were opening up, giving this coffee an abundance of depth. So you're experiencing a lot of things in this one. A fair bit of fruits, as well as a fair bit of that savory tea-like aspect. And then, of course, that bergamot is something that I've been kind of highlighting and noting, and the stone fruits, of course, being one of the more defining profiles of this one. Day 31 through the Chemex with Coffea Circulor's recipe, and this is probably the least amount of depth that I experienced to this coffee up to this point, as it has a fair bit of that slight soapy quality to it present yet again, with the listed jasmine and citric aspects also being a little bit more defined. So that's the best case I had for the Chemex, was it seems to offer a fair bit more of the jasmine. That was exceptionally well defined through that brew method. but I don't know if it was necessarily worth the trade-off, as I felt like the sweetness was maybe a little bit more abundant through the V60, as there's a slight bit of a brown candied sweetness in line with the listed toffee. That was interesting to me, something I don't typically experience a lot from Panamanian geishas. Plenty of that tea-like savoriness yet again, so not quite as good, focusing in maybe some directions I wasn't looking for in this one. Day 34, same recipe as the day 28, and it continues to remain slightly more tame, as it does have wonderful clarity, a delicate body, and some soft citric acidity yet again, but the flavor profile is a little bit more delicate, with the citrus being the most abundant factor, skewing a little bit more in the sweeter direction, but it is also being complemented by a hidden brown candied sweetness and a tea-like savoriness. So there's a lot to pull from this coffee. You are experiencing a lot of flavors, there's a lot of depth, and for that reason, it made for a very interesting drink throughout. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have one level 5, so let's go through that one real quick. Then cleanliness, level 5. Yes, and this one was a very clean cup of coffee. Once again, washed Panamanian geisha, something you're fully expecting, and in no sense could it have necessarily been marred by anything. The flavor profiles in this one are very well defined, and that's one of the best things I can take away from this coffee, is you're tasting these things very cleanly. And we're going to go through a lot of those one by one, but that leads into the level 4s. We'll start with the finish and the sweetness level 4, because I still feel like those go together when it comes to Panamanian geishas, as long as the cleanliness is at a level 5. So it does have a sweet and clean finish to it. It's probably going to finish in that level 4 mark, and it's going to be a little bit more even. This one's no exception to that rule, as we do have a couple of level 4s outside of those things, including the florality. Level 4, yes, this is an exceptionally well-defined jasmine-like aspect to this one. Even then, though, it's not maybe quite as heavy or as strong as I've experienced from some other coffees, mostly because this coffee, it kind of offered glimpses of a lot of things, including that jasmine. That's something we're going to discuss a little bit more here, as I'm going to the citric component, which also finished at the level 4, because I do believe that they have something along the lines of like an orange, but I have mentioned right from the start that there's that kind of Coffea Circulor bergamot-like aspect to it. So experiencing both of those things, both a sweeter orange and a little bit more of an herbal citric component to it. So the citrus fruit definitely justifies that level 4 mark. And then we have quite a few level 3s. We will start with the acidity, level 3. A little bit more toned down than I might have expected given the roast profile of this one, but it's not quite as bright as some of the other coffees we're reviewing of these 7 coffees. In addition to that, the spice quality is also there at that level 3. Again, classic Coffea Circulor-like aspects to it. If you go back and watch some of our uniquely processed Kenyan coffees, they all seem to have that quality, as well as a number of other coffees that we discussed from them too. So that's interesting. I don't want to say too surprising. It was a little surprising at the start, but it was persistent throughout. Stone fruit, level 3. Yes, as I kind of mentioned, that mango aspect is subtle, and it's not always quite as pronounced or as present as some of the other things in this one. So while when you're experiencing it, it's very well defined, it's not always there. Then we have the caramel, level 4, correction, level 3. Yes, and that's very interesting to me that they do have this toffee note listed on here. And after the first couple of run-throughs, it's not necessarily something that I picked up, but there was one point specifically through the Chemex, and from that point going forward, I was able to pick up a little bit more of that brown candied sweetness to it. Very unique in terms of Panamanian geishas. Yet again, I'm going to continue to harp on that because I can't quite recall any that I've had that strong of a caramelized brown candied sweetness to it. And then last thing is the savoriness at that level 3 mark. So that was that kind of tea-like aspect. And given that they had the chamomile note list on here, that made a lot of sense. There's a fair bit more savory tea, kind of herbal tea present in this one. And I lied, there's one more thing that is worth discussing, and that is the body at the level 1, because as we're going through these 7 coffees, you will notice that some Panamanian geishas scored the level 1 and some scored the level 2. Even with this one being through the V60, the body on it was so light and so delicate that this one had a little bit more of that tea-like body, so a little less texture than some of the other coffees we're going to be discussing. But as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think that it's a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. Alright, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I do feel like it's kind of interesting because I don't know if you could necessarily determine how I felt about this one from the way I've described it up to this point. But I do have to say that I enjoyed it. It was just maybe a little bit different from what I expected going into it. And it does stand out from the other Panamanian geishas as being maybe the most unique of them. As Specifically, the kind of all over the board flavor profiles that were present within this one. On the one hand, you could say just wonderful depth. It's offering you so many different things, and that is true. I think that out of all these coffees we're discussing, this is the one where I'm like, all these notes, they're present. I can feel all of them. I'm experiencing all of them throughout. So that's a nice little positive to it. But just like I mentioned with the Lorita, I didn't maybe want a little bit more focus on this one. If maybe we could have emphasized or really seemed to focus a little bit more on those sugary stone fruit aspects, that mango that I experienced from the start in abundance, maybe I would like this coffee a little bit more. The floral component, that's the best takeaway I have from it, because as I kind of mentioned, that jasmine being as well defined and pronounced as it was throughout the entirety of this one was probably my favorite part of this coffee. But outside of that, I haven't necessarily been the biggest fan of that kind of herbal aspect that's present in so many of Coffea Circular's coffees. So I feel like maybe that took away from all of the other positives I was experiencing from this one. But that being said, I liked everything else I had in this coffee. The florality was great, the fruit components were great, that additional brown candied sweetness was great. Of course, the clarity as well as just standard sweetness were all wonderful things, and I don't mind the acidity being a little toned down. So in one camp, I really liked it. In the other camp, I thought that maybe there was a little bit more that I could have enjoyed from this one. But these Coffea Circular ones are slightly smaller bags, so I only have as much samples as I do, and for that reason, I think maybe there was just a little bit more potential to be unlocked within this one. The type of person I would suggest this coffee to, I feel like people that skew a little bit more in the direction of a lot of flavors within your coffee, because I like those things, but I think you really have to like all of those because you're going to be experiencing all of those. You're going to be experiencing some well-defined florality as well as some well-defined citrus. The stone fruits, again, well-defined. The brown candy aspect, very well-defined. All of these things are very well-defined. And you're experiencing them at certain points in significant enough abundance to really warrant all of the definition that's present within them. So a lot of positives to take away from this one. Best direction I can point somebody towards for it, and the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Dilgo WX wash processed Panama from Coffea Circulor. Thank you for watching.